Thank you to everyone listening today. My name is Aaron, and today I have the opportunity to talk to certified yoga therapist Jenny Clise, who is going to share some insight into an interesting topic, and that is the use of props in yoga. She has trained over 1,000 hours, probably a lot more than that at this point. And she has been teaching since 2012, taking the approach of prioritizing individual needs and encouraging self-discovery through mindful movement, breath work, and props. She is here to tell us all about her experiences as a yoga therapist and in using yoga props, which she detailed vividly in her book, in her new book, The Complete Guide to Yoga Props. So again, thank you so much, Jenny, for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
So I know I gave a brief introduction for you right there, but I know it only scratches the surface of really your experiences and everything we're going to talk about. So I'm interested, as I'm sure a lot of the listeners are, in what your journey looks like to this point. You know, what piqued your interest initially in, getting involved in yoga, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, that is a loaded question. I guess I did dance when I was younger through high school. And when I got to college, yoga just was something that felt similar to me, but in a different way. It felt kinder to my body. So I was initially drawn for a little bit of like the athleticism or the similar movement in yoga. And over the years, it's completely evolved for me. And I'm sure it'll continue to evolve. You know, if we have an IG Live in 5 years, it might be a completely different answer. But, getting more into the meditative practice, the philosophical practice, all these other things that yoga embodies and is, a greater part of the amalgamation of yoga is kind of where my journey has led me. And, I got a lot of injuries and things when I did dance when I was younger. And with yoga, I found ways to adapt my practice. And one of the big things that was really helpful was props. So I got really passionate about, spreading the word about props, sort of my nerdy yoga initiative. And it has led me here into this book that has, infinite probabilities.
All right. So something that resonated to me immediately in the book, and it's actually in the foreword. I know you didn't write the foreword, obviously, you had someone else write it, but something that it sounds like you probably agree with is that in the last 100 years, Europeans and Americans realized that we're not created perfectly. I can speak for myself. I know that I'm definitely not perfect, but probably everyone listening knows that they have some flaws. But I'm guessing that what that kind of led to is the idea that not everyone is going to train or practice yoga exactly the same. But it seemed to give context to the book and the importance of using props and providing a resource like this. So what is the importance of that in terms of, realizing that not everyone is going to be able to practice yoga exactly the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so happy to have had Dr. Lauren Fishman write the foreword to the book because it blends well into the answer to this question. He was one of my mentors when I did my yoga therapy training, and yoga therapy is a little bit different than your average yoga teacher training because what you're learning is how to cater to the needs of the individual. And we learn that, what a yoga practice looks like in one body or one person's needs is not going to look the same in every body. And there aren't any like hard and fast rules in terms of alignment or, what is anatomically correct. It's really what works for you. And so yoga props are a great way to adapt your practice. And it doesn't necessarily always mean, oh, we're always modifying or this is something for beginners. It is also a way to adapt your practice in a way that can be challenging or deepening and can also accommodate other things. Like in yoga therapy, we work a lot of times outside of the scope of a group class. So maybe you're working with a certain population. If you're working with people who have, heart disease, you might be working in a chair yoga practice. If you're working for physical rehabilitation or injury, you might be using props in a way that is going to suit the needs of what you're trying to, um, you know, reduce pain around. So I really like that this book offers opportunities for people to adapt their practice to make it their own, even within a group class setting.
What are I'm interested, and it's something that I wanted to bring up is that there are very specific needs for this. So, what are some of those examples that maybe you have worked with in terms of some of the contraindications that you might come across, and where yoga props might be beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of ways that you can use props. One that comes to mind for me a lot is the wall,
Hmm.
right? There's a lot
Okay.
of things that you could do traditionally, maybe standing, but you could maybe do lying down with a wall, or let's say you're not trying to round the spine forward, you have like osteoporosis or osteopenia, you might use a wall to get up and down from the ground. You might lie on your back and do a pigeon with your foot against a wall versus doing a traditional pigeon pose where you're rounding the spine forward.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a knee injury where you need blankets to cushion the knee or to roll under the knee, just to name a few.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you're doing a prenatal practice, you might have a very different looking shavasana that's bolster supported than what you might normally do if you are, not during pregnancy. So there's so many different examples of ways that props could show up.
Okay. Um, I know something that I found interesting in the book was that it it not kind of what you're talking about here is that it not only teaches you ways to use props, but it helps you explore ways to be adaptable and creative with it. I like the line, imagine if MacGyver himself were teaching or practicing yoga, he would be innovative with it. For people who might not be aware, MacGyver was a secret agent back in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was a reboot, I believe, in 2016. Um, he used everything from like duct tape, Swiss Army knife, paper clips, pretty much anything that he could find. If you don't know what we're talking about, go look it up. You'll probably think it's interesting. But anyway, so I guess in that sense, can we call you the MacGyver of yoga in that sense?
Uh, I definitely can't lay claim to that because
Right.
I think I think that the really amazing thing about yoga is that all teachers learn from their teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the main points that I really wanted to get across in this book is even though there are over 800 prop variations, every time I go to a yoga class, there's something that a teacher teaches that just isn't in the book. And it's
Mm-hmm.
bittersweet because in one sense, I think it would have been a great addition to the book. And then in the other sense, it's representing the idea that there's no cap to the possibilities of the ways that you can do, and there's always opportunity to learn more. And, predating me writing this book, there were people who found objects that probably weren't formed into the modern day yoga block or bolster, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it was, a phone book or, blankets laying around the house, or pillows. And they had a need in their yoga practice or saw a need in their students and they solved for that need. And over time, props have evolved to be a part of, you know, yoga as we know in modern day. But it all came from the ingenuity of people before who were MacGyvering their way through their practice when they, needed something beyond just their yoga mat.
Something this reminds me of, and again, I'm will be fully upfront, and I'm not as experienced in yoga, more on the uh, that athletic training, strength and conditioning side, that side, but kind of reminds me of when we had to be adaptable, especially during COVID shutdowns and trying to keep people active and find new ways to train. Not everyone had a home gym, so they had to find different creative ways to do that, whether it's using like in our case, like a milk jug for, extra weight or whatnot. So, what were your experiences like during that time? I know you've been teaching since 2012. What were some of your experiences, and did that kind of push this idea of yoga props along maybe a little more for you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, yes, I remember the pandemic where we all switched over to online classes, and it was new for some people. Some people had been teaching online prior, but everyone kind of had to make the switch, and it wasn't just teachers; it was students as well. So, as a teacher, it's not uncommon to have yoga props lying around your
Right.
house. As a student, you usually go to class and they have those things ready for you. And so I think that since the pandemic, people have now acquired more props at home and
Mm-hmm.
resources. But the pandemic did inspire some of my DIY options in the prop chart if you don't have the traditional props at home. And a few that weren't in there. I think one comes to mind. This isn't in my prop chart, but I remember when I was in New York during the pandemic, there was just a shortage of everything, and my mom had to send me like supplies, and I had 2 containers of Clorox wipes.
Okay.
They were like the last Clorox wipes in New York, and I found out that they were the same height as a yoga block.
Oh, okay.
So I started saying in classes, hey, if you don't have yoga blocks, if you have 2 of these Clorox containers, I don't know how eco-friendly they are, but
Right.
they might work, or find something around the same height of that if you need a measurement. And you could use a bathrobe tie instead of a yoga strap, or a belt if you have a pretty long one.
Mhm.
And blankets, pillows, you can stack them to make them more firm. So yeah, it definitely brought some creative ideas. And I'm sure that this is sort of how yoga props came to be, that same process of like first using home supplies and then saying, hey, maybe we should make something more with more longevity, and um, call them yoga
Right.
props.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, do you think this is something that will maybe push, hopefully push more people toward yoga in helping them be creative? Where maybe if they can't get out and go to a yoga studio, I mean that you're giving people ideas of ways that they can do some of these practices at home, or just in a completely different setting. Do you think this might push more people toward yoga and at least giving it a shot?
Yeah, I think that one of the big things of or themes of my book is inclusivity. I want people to see themselves in the pages. I want them to know that yoga is for you too.
Mhm.
And some people are more comfortable starting a practice at home, but you know, when they finally do get to the studio, this book also is very, very much for yoga teachers, or yoga teachers in training as well, because I want them to feel that same inclusivity in a group setting as they might practicing at home as well. And I think some of that responsibility falls on the teacher. So, and it really came to me one day when I was talking to a few of my students who had, I didn't know at the time, started practicing yoga with
Oh,
me. And I always tell my students, as a requirement, we're going to need 2 blocks today. And then, other days I'll add in more props to the practice. And at first it was some people wouldn't grab them. And then I'd say, no, you actually need them for what we're doing. It's not an if you need it or if you have to modify,
mhm.
you're going to need it to accomplish the drill or exercise that we're doing. So over time, everyone started grabbing props. I saw them using them in classes on their own, getting creative. And I was talking to them about my book, and I said, I really want to break the myths one of them being that yoga props are just for beginners. And they
Mm.
looked at me and they were puzzled. And I repeated myself, you know, how people think yoga props are for beginners. And they were like, and they were so confused because they thought using props was a really advanced thing to be able to know how to use props in their practice and to help them achieve what they were working on. And it occurred to me when they told me it's because they had started practicing in my classes, a lot of the perpetuation of maybe what people feel about yoga props could be also on our shoulders as yoga teachers,
Mm.
because we do so much training. But you know, your first 200-hour teacher training, you get so much information thrown at you. It's sort of like yoga props are the side dish or an afterthought.
Okay.
And it's something that you kind of have to self-learn on your own. And not to say that that is the case for every training, right?
Mm.
Um, but in my experience, it doesn't seem to be the primary thing, because
Okay.
there's so much that you learn when you're doing a teacher training. So we get into classes, we start teaching, and we say, well, grab a block if you need a modify, or grab a block if you need it, versus empowering our students to say, hey, everyone grab a block today. We're going to be doing this drill to help, you know, build muscle memory about chaturanga alignments and build that repetition in. And I think that empowers our students to take on a different perception of the props, to feel more inclusive,
Okay.
because the language that we use, if you need it, if you need to modify it, well, that's immediately going to turn on the ego of every
Hmm.
student in the class. And, you know, well, I don't need that prop. So,
Right.
so I think that, you know, it's not just for students practicing at home, but also for teachers to really empower their students to think of props as something that is, you know, going to take their practice where they want it to go.
Okay. So I'm interested, and maybe some of the listeners, what are some of those specific examples that you might be able to give people today? Maybe they're at home and they want to, give something to try at home, and maybe that'll lead them to, seeking out a yoga studio in their area. What are some specific examples that you can give today, using some of these props that you use in your book, or maybe some new ideas that came about after the book?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many different things that people could do with props, but you know, the very minimal, if you're someone listening who doesn't have yoga blocks or a bolster or a yoga strap at home, you might just find a wall
Okay.
and try some of your yoga poses with the wall, because yes, it can, you know, support you, it can support balance, it can support alignment, but it can also be a really great tool to reinforce or give feedback. Say if you were doing Warrior 3 with your foot, and Warrior 3 is a balancing pose where you're standing on one leg, the opposite leg's extended behind you. If you have your foot pressing into the wall behind you, that's going to give you the feedback to engage the muscles of the leg, to lengthen through the spine.
Okay.
So, and just like a wall could give you feedback in that sense, you could also lie on your back and place a blanket on your belly if you want to reinforce the breath, right? I
Mhm.
feel this weight on my belly. So now I know where to direct my breath. I'm letting the lungs release down, the diaphragm release, the belly expands. And sometimes that's hard to just feel when you're thinking about breathing into your belly.
Sure.
So those are a few ways that you can. Maybe you're someone with wrist injuries. Maybe
Mm.
go grab a pair of yoga blocks and try placing them under your hands to shift more weights into your
Oh,
feet.
okay.
Yeah.
Very good ideas. How do you see that now? I know this has been around for a little while, and people, need to be adaptive in certain ways. But how do you see a resource like this, and maybe just getting the information out in general? How do you see that changing the yoga practice moving forward?
Well, the yoga practice in what sense? Like in
Just maybe the maybe the popularity of yoga. I know yoga is increasing in popularity, of course, but just maybe like you talked about the inclusivity of it, and maybe helping other people realize that this is something that they can utilize to become more active in yoga.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that one of the beautiful things that I've noticed as yoga therapy as a profession has been growing over the past several years, and as the population also has been becoming more geriatric. And I say that
Okay.
again, not to say that yoga props are just for modifications or beginners,
Yep.
but there is a greater need out there for an adaptive yoga practice. And there are more people seeking out individual tailored approaches to their practice. And I think that this book is going to be a great resource that bridges this sort of already naturally evolving yoga community. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing more books coming out that are props positive or adaptive yoga positive. I'm seeing more books that are catering to all ages and backgrounds and bodies, and sort of expanding maybe the more rigid yoga that we used to know. You know, my first teacher training, we had these very hard alignment cues that we were taught. Um, and it wasn't even that long ago, 2012, but even now, I'm sure that the same teacher training has completely changed, right?
Right.
It's no longer never do this, always do this. Like, never, always have your knees directly over your ankle. People are realizing, well, but what if I want to work on my ankle flexion? What if I want to increase that range of motion? So there are ways to do there are many ways to do one pose and achieve a different result.
Okay.
You can activate different muscle groups in the same pose simply by how you interact with the pose. And props are a great way to play around with that. I think that as this is becoming more known, and I'm seeing more teachers getting playful in their classes, and I'm seeing more teacher training starting to integrate this sort of idea of making yoga more accessible or diverse or adaptive, that this book is going to be a great resource for students, teachers in training alike.
Okay, and I do think that it is going to. I mean, just myself looking through it, I do think it is going to help a lot of people. Definitely gave me a lot more ideas of ways, and it just kind of understanding the practice as a whole. So I definitely think you did a great job with that. This has been a great conversation, and I hope all the listeners continue to explore. The use of props in yoga and just yoga in general. So if you haven't got your copy yet and you're listening, definitely pick it up. The Complete Guide to Yoga Props. It is available on the Human Kinetics website, us.humankinetics.com. I believe I saw it's also available on Amazon, I think online at Target. So you're going to find it multiple places. So like we mentioned, I don't know if I can flip through real quick, but just color photos and very, I guess, descriptive demonstrations on every page in the book that are definitely going to help you. So, very informative here. Jenny, I want to thank you so much for your time today, and I will give you the last word here to kind of wrap it up, and maybe let everyone know how they can follow you, continue following all the great information that you're putting out.
Thank you. And yeah, it was a pleasure getting to speak with you today and answer some of the questions that you had about the book. I'm really excited that it's finally out. And just to circle back, I think it is
Yeah.
available on Kindle, but it will
Okay.
be on Amazon paperback in the next week or so.
Okay.
But you can still get it on the Human Kinetics website.
Yep.
For updates on that, you can follow me here on Instagram. The one that I'm on now, Jenny Clise _. And my website is also my name, Jenny Clise. And so it's pretty easy to find me and stay connected. And, if there were questions that you have as a viewer that weren't answered in this Instagram Live, feel free to message me and I'm happy to answer any of your questions.